What happened to NYC's hidden mail tubes that no longer exist? Have you ever heard of forgotten wonders beneath the ground? More than a century ago, right beneath bustling New York, a secret network transported millions of letters daily. This enormous pneumatic tube system, over 43 kilometers, 27 miles long, connected 23 post offices, propelling mail canisters at a speed of 56 kilometers per hour, 35 miles per hour. Amazingly, in its very first test in 1897, they even sent a live cat and an artificial peach through it. So why was such an advanced technology forgotten? Let's explore this nostalgic story. State of mail transport, 1800s. To understand the importance of the pneumatic mail tube system, we must go back in time to mid-19th century New York, a booming city struggling with the most basic infrastructure challenges. At that time, intra-city mail transport was primarily done by horse or even on foot. Imagine the bumpy, narrow cobblestone streets where pedestrians, horse-drawn carriages, vehicles, and even livestock jostled together, creating an incredibly chaotic scene. The city's first post office, located on Nassau Street, relied on employees sorting mail by hand and mail carriers who had to navigate a maze of streets without a uniform address system, often delivering mail by memory. New York's population grew continuously, along with strong commercial development, which severely overloaded the traditional postal system. By the 1830s, mail carriers faced an environment full of obstacles and harsh weather conditions. The introduction of free home delivery service in 1863, though considered a big step forward in reality, further exposed the city's unprepared infrastructure. Businesses, especially those on Wall Street where transaction speed was vital, had to resort to private delivery services due to delayed mail. They could not wait hours or even days for important correspondence to travel just a few miles within the city. New York was looking for a solution, a way to speed up communication, reduce street chaos, and meet the growing demands of a global commercial hub. Idea and inspiration. In this context, the idea of pneumatic technology began to attract attention. This technology was not entirely new. It had appeared in London, where the London Pneumatic Dispatch Company had implemented a short system to transport mail and small goods through iron tubes using air pressure. Paris also followed with its own network underground. Engineers in New York took notice and recognized the immense potential of this technology for their city. In fact, as early as the 1870s, the first pneumatic tubes appeared in New York, not for transporting mail but for transferring telegrams and banking documents. These initial pipelines demonstrated the ability to move cylindrical boxes via air pressure much faster than anything on the surface. Initial construction process. Even so, the U.S. Post Office remained hesitant. The system was considered expensive, required extensive maintenance, and had not proven effective for large-scale postal use. However, by the 1890s, Manhattan's post offices were completely overwhelmed. The demand for rapid internal communications surged with the explosive growth of Wall Street and new industries. This was the moment city officials, engineers, and the federal government began planning to adapt pneumatic tube technology for mail service. Contracts were signed, routes were meticulously planned, and shafts were dug deep beneath some of America's busiest intersections. The construction was done in segments with tubes lifted and welded underground, sometimes through sidewalk vaults or service alleys to avoid disrupting surface business operations. Historic opening day, October 7, 1897. October 7, 1897 went down in history. At the New York General Post Office at Park Row and Broadway, Senator Chauncey M. Depew presided over this historic opening ceremony. He declared, "This is the age of speed. Everything that contributes to speed contributes to happiness, and is a distinct achievement for civilization." Depew emphasized that New York had surpassed other nations in almost every aspect, but lagged in intra-city communication methods. He expressed hope that this new system would soon be expanded throughout Greater New York, considering it essential for the city's success. Interestingly, the first item sent was not serious mail. It was a large artificial peach. This was a pun related to Senator Deepew's affectionate nickname, the Peach Then. An even bigger surprise stunned the crowd. A live cat was placed into a cylindrical mail canister and sent through. Unbelievably, the cat survived the high-speed curving journey. It appeared dazed for a minute or two, but then began to run and was quickly secured. Next was a full suit of clothes. Only after the crowd had enjoyed hearty laughs and extreme astonishment did serious items begin to be sent. A Bible wrapped in the American flag, a copy of the U.S. Constitution, and President William McKinley's inaugural address. The round trip, nearly 2,300 meters, 2,500 yards, from the main post office building to the New York Produce Exchange, took less than 3 minutes, most of which was for unloading and loading. The system was built by the Tubular Dispatch Company, then acquired and operated by the New York Pneumatic Service Company, under contract with the Postal Service. After 1902, construction continued under the New York Mail and Newspaper Transportation Company. Workers operating this system were nicknamed Rocketeers, reflecting the speed and innovation they were controlling. For the public and the press, this was a technological marvel, a promise of a future where mail would move as fast as the city's own pace. Detailed operating mechanism. As the pneumatic tube system gradually developed, it became an indispensable part of New York's infrastructure, reaching its golden age. Its operating mechanism was quite simple yet incredibly efficient. It used compressed air or vacuum suction to push or pull cylindrical containers, also called carriers, through the underground network of pipes. These carriers could reach an impressive speed of up to 56 kilometers per hour or 35 miles per hour. Each carrier was specially designed for maximum efficiency. They were approximately 60 centimeters, 24 inches, long and 8 inches in diameter. To ensure airtightness and smooth movement, both ends of the carrier were wrapped with felt and leather. With these dimensions, each carrier could hold a huge volume of mail, from 400 to 600 letters per transport. For convenient high-speed movement, the pipes were lubricated with oil. Notably, each tube route had 2 parallel pipes, one for sending mail and one for receiving mail, ensuring a continuous and uninterrupted flow of transport. The pipe network was located 1 to 4 meters, 4 to 6 feet, deep underground. Some sections even ran through existing subway tunnels, showing the system's clever integration into New York's complex underground infrastructure. These carriers were labeled externally with their destinations. However, all carriers had to pass through every station, and if a carrier did not reach its final destination, it would be sent back into the system and continue its journey. The system's power was supplied by old electric motors manufactured by famous companies like General Electric and Westinghouse, generating air pressure through rotary blowers and air compressors. Scale and importance. This system quickly developed into a massive network, eventually spanning over 43 kilometers, 27 miles, and connecting 23 post offices throughout New York. It extended across Manhattan, from Bowling Green in the south, home to bustling Wall Street, to Manhattanville and East Harlem in the north. A branch even extended to Brooklyn via the Brooklyn Bridge, transporting mail from Church Street in Lower Manhattan to the Brooklyn Central Post Office in just 4 minutes. A crosstown line was also built, connecting 2 parallel lines between the new Central Post Office in the west and Grand Central Station in the east, taking only 4 minutes for mail to travel through. The scale and importance of this system were undeniable. Up to 200,000 letters were transported through the tubes every hour. At its peak, the system transported 95,000 letters daily, accounting for up to 30% of the city's total mail. Its efficiency significantly reduced mail transit time. A mail route that once took 40 minutes in New York was shortened to just 7 minutes, thanks to the pneumatic tube system. The system was particularly useful in harsh weather conditions when New York's streets were almost impassable. The New York Times once wrote, "New York streets are almost impassable, but New York businesses still receive important mail on time. The pneumatic tube helped transport mail." In addition to transporting mail, the pneumatic tube system also served as the analog email of its time, especially for Wall Street and large businesses. It allowed important transactions to take place on the same day, with companies sending multiple contracts, confirmations, and invoices daily. Each capsule was manually logged, timed, and routed by clerks. The system operated almost continuously from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. on weekdays and from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Saturdays, with no service on Sundays and holidays. Although not a service the public directly interacted with, its presence changed how mail reached its destination, bringing unprecedented speed and efficiency to the city. Challenges in construction and maintenance. Although a technological marvel of its era, New York's massive pneumatic mail tube system was not without its challenges. Its construction and maintenance required extraordinary efforts and continuously faced many unexpected difficulties. One of the biggest challenges during installation was having to avoid existing sewer pipes, gas lines, and other underground utilities already present beneath the city. New York was already a maze of underground pipes and cables, making it a complex task to find space for the new system. High groundwater levels also caused significant difficulties, hindering excavation, and installation construction crews had to tunnel under active streets, dodging water pipes, gas lines, and streetcar tracks. Installation was meticulously timed to avoid disrupting business hours. Once the system became operational, maintenance costs became a huge burden. Tubes corroded over time, gaskets cracked, and air compressors needed constant adjustment. Repairing this damage was very expensive and labor-intensive. For example, in March 1922, a mail carrier stuck in the northbound tube from Grand Central to Park Row caused hours of service disruption. Maintenance crews had to use steel rods to retrieve the stuck carrier through a sidewalk vault near 45th Street. This route was shut down for hours, and mail had to be rerouted manually. Internal reports also noted that rubber gaskets quickly failed, and replacement parts became increasingly difficult to find. Incidents and dangers. Another serious problem was that the system had no internal tracking capability. Staff had to rely entirely on timing and judgment to locate blockages. This often led to having to dig up entire streets to fix problems, a costly and inconvenient process for urban traffic. And not just inconvenience, but dangers also lurked. At least one death was reported when a test caused a violent pipe burst. This explosion injured and killed repair workers who were excavating a section under 4th Avenue to fix a break in the pipe. The cause of the explosion was later blamed on a vacuum reset error and a communication failure between repair crews at both ends of the pipe. Government criticism. These incidents, along with high operating costs, led the system to face criticism from the government. Government studies argued that mail could be handled at lower cost and faster by other means. The increasing volume of mail, along with the limited capacity of the pneumatic tube system, made it almost obsolete. The companies operating the pneumatic tube system fiercely opposed these studies, but subsequent investigations showed that any reporting errors actually favored the tubes. It was also argued that if the tubes were truly successful, they would have been more widely adopted by the commercial industry. By the late 1920s, city transportation began to change again. Motorized delivery trucks became faster and cheaper, capable of transporting larger volumes without relying on fixed routes. Improvements in street infrastructure also helped reduce congestion. This meant that the speed advantage the pneumatic tubes once offered began to be caught up by surface delivery. Expensive operating costs. Although once a symbol of innovation and speed, New York's pneumatic mail tube system eventually faced its twilight, primarily due to excessively high operating costs and the emergence of competing technologies. High operating costs were the primary factor leading to the system's downfall. Tube rental became an enormous financial burden. The federal government considered the annual rental payment of $17,000 per mile per year to be too expensive. To illustrate, the Brooklyn pipe section alone cost $14,000 in rent per year and $6,200 in labor costs, equivalent to approximately $529,144 and $234,335 in 2024. A 1931 U.S. Post Office report explicitly stated the rising operating costs and questioned the system's future, noting that they were too expensive for the service they provided. By the late 1940s, the cost of transporting a letter by tube was several times higher than by surface means. Even during off-peak hours, the tube line still required full staffing and constant air pressure, regardless of mail volume. Competition from new technologies. Along with the financial burden, competition from emerging technologies pushed the pneumatic tube system into a difficult position. Motorized cars and delivery trucks became faster and cheaper. They could transport much larger volumes of mail without relying on fixed routes, providing flexibility that the underground tube system could not. Improvements in street infrastructure, reducing congestion, also made surface delivery more efficient. Additionally, telegrams and telephone lines began to take over the delivery of urgent messages, increasingly limiting the pneumatic tube system to inter-post office mail transport. Decision to cease operations. World War I also played a role in the system's cessation. Service was temporarily suspended to allocate funding for the war effort. After the war, only New York and Boston restored service, while other cities did not. Nevertheless, the system continued to operate for decades afterward, despite continuous improvements in surrounding delivery methods. However, the increasing volume of mail, high operating costs, and urban development rendered the system impractical. By the 1950s, the pneumatic system completely ceased operations. In 1953, Postmaster General Arthur E. Summerfield ordered the permanent suspension of New York's pneumatic mail service, declaring it obsolete, unnecessary, and too expensive. Unlike the grand opening ceremony, no public ceremony was held for the final mail run. Workers simply sealed the ends of the tubes and shut off the air compressors, quietly ending an ambitious Era A once pioneering technology, which had promised a bright future, was now just a forgotten relic beneath the ground. Interestingly, while New York's system was closed, Paris's system, with a much larger network, approximately 400 kilometers or 250 miles, continued to operate for another 34 years until 1987. Although Paris's tubes were smaller and transported fewer types of mail, its long existence shows the difference in how each city dealt with challenges and technological changes. Brief revival. After a temporary suspension during the World War I, many believe the pneumatic mail tube system had completely become a thing of the past. However, thanks to a successful lobbying campaign from contractors who had built and operated the system, service was restored in 1922 in New York and Boston. This revival brought a wave of hope for those who believed in the potential of pneumatic technology, and the system continued to operate for decades afterward, serving the city's communication needs. Even during this period considered a revival, the system still faced increasing challenges from the rapid development of new delivery methods. By 1931, a U.S. Post Office report explicitly stated the rising operating costs and questioned the system's future, remarking that they were extremely expensive relative to the service provided. By the late 1940s, the cost of transporting each letter by tube was several times higher than by surface transport, an undeniable fact about its economic inefficiency. Despite recovery efforts and an extended period of operation, the fate of New York's pneumatic mail tube system was sealed. Finally, in 1953, Postmaster General Arthur E. Summerfield ordered the permanent suspension of New York's pneumatic mail service. This decision was made with clear reasons. The system had become obsolete, unnecessary, and too expensive. This marked the end of an era of pioneering underground technology for the city. Unlike a formal ceremony to honor the end of an era, no public ceremony was held for the final mail run between Grand Central and the Central Post Office. This event occurred in silence, with only the workers quietly performing their last duties. They simply sealed the ends of the tubes and shut off the air compressors, ending the operation of a network that was once New York's lifeline. Most of this system was not dismantled but simply ceased operation, lying dormant as an underground relic, awaiting rediscovery one day. Physical remnants. Today, much of New York's massive pneumatic mail tube system lies dormant beneath the city's streets. a silent reminder of a bygone era. However, physical traces still remain, allowing us to visualize a network that once buzzed underground. A significant portion of the tube system is still preserved at the Old Chelsea Post Office, located at 217 West 18th Street. Here, steel tubes protrude from a basement wall at the end of a forgotten brick corridor filled with office supplies. These tube sections are the clearest evidence of the existence of a technology that once propelled mail at 30 miles per hour beneath Manhattan. Other parts of the system have been excavated or destroyed in previous decades. Another example of remnants is at the former headquarters of the H.W. Wilson Publishing Company, now an archive. This location also retains some parts of the old tube system. Furthermore, at the Madison Square Post Office during renovation, workers found a full page of the New York Daily News from September 21, 1937. This newspaper was stuck between concrete and an old conduit, likely inserted as padding to keep the pipe fixed. The front page of the newspaper was intact, featuring an image of Spencer Tracy boxing in the movie Big City, a frozen moment from the system's heyday. Although no longer active, these components offer insight into the building's previous reliance on rapid internal communication. Interestingly, in 2001, an attempt was made to install fiber optics into these tubes, but it ultimately failed. Interesting and surprising stories. Besides physical remnants, the pneumatic mail tube system also left behind many interesting and surprising stories, showing its uniqueness and sometimes oddity. One such story is about sandwich transport. A former rocketeer who worked at the Bronx post office recalled that sometimes sandwich orders from downtown stations were unofficially sent through the tubes because the sandwiches arrived faster than a taxi. The system also entered popular culture, referenced in various works. It appeared in the video game Grim Fandango, films like Brazil and Ghostbusters. It was also depicted in animated series like Futurama and episodes of The Blacklist, The Umbrella Academy, and the popular TV series Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It even appeared in the John Wick universe, showing its widespread influence in the public consciousness. Technological legacy. Remarkably, although this large pneumatic mail tube system was decommissioned, pneumatic technology is still widely used in other fields today. You can find them in hospitals where they are used to quickly and efficiently transport lab samples, medications, and other important medical items drive-through banks, which use this system to send and receive money from customers, providing convenience and security. The main branch of the New York Public Library still uses a similar system to send book requests to their enormous underground stacks, where staff retrieve materials and send them back to reading rooms. Thank you for joining us on this journey exploring the 1880s with Back to Yesterday. If you enjoyed this journey back in time, don't forget to subscribe to the Back to Yesterday channel so you don't miss other interesting historical stories, and share this video with friends who also love history and nostalgic tales. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.